Let's talk about why sex tech can be so compelling for so many people. This is at least one reason that I think is important for folks to understand, and that is that sex tech is an example of what we call a supernormal stimuli. And a supernormal stimuli is basically a stimuli in the environment that's created to gratify an instinctive need even more strongly than nature can do on its own.
Before we start, a small disclaimer. The Sex Doctors podcast is not a substitute for medical or psychological advice.
So, our instincts are there for a reason and they're gratified by nature. And a supernormal stimuli is a man-made stimuli to meet that same need that nature can meet, but even in a grander scale. So let's talk about the research that was first sort of helped solidify this concept. And it was done in the 1950s with birds. And what they did was they took a fertile male bird and they put it in a cage with a fertile female bird, but also with a stuffed fake female bird with exaggerated sex characteristics. So if the real female bird had a certain kind of feather plumage thing going on, the stuffed bird had huge feathers going on. It was much larger than a normal female bird, and it had a lot more exaggerated feathers. And so they wanted to see what the male bird would do, and you probably know where I'm headed with this. The male bird tried to mate with the stuffed bird with the exaggerated female characteristics as opposed to the real bird, the real fertile female. Now, they did this same research with female birds. They put female birds in a cage with a real egg that was speckled, a real egg that needed to be incubated, right, to be sat on. And they also put in that cage an exaggerated egg. So it was much bigger than the real egg. And rather than speckled, it was polka dotted, looked really silly. And what did the female bird do? She tried to sit on the exaggerated stuffed egg. So those are examples of supernormal stimuli. They took advantage of an instinct that the bird had and then tried to sort of present a stimuli that gratified it in a much bigger way than nature could. Now, we've talked about food as examples of supernormal stimuli in that for example, modern food has been modified, manipulated, taste manipulation so much that it can't be replicated by nature and can gratify our natural instinct toward sweet, for example. So like apples occur in nature, and from an evolutionary perspective, we are instinctively oriented towards sweets because they give us more calories. And most of the time that we've been on this planet as primates, we needed calories. Calories were hard to come by. So apples are an example of a sweeter food that would potentially have more calories that we would be just sort of instinctively oriented to like. But what we've done now with apples is we've made apple pie. So we take the apple, we add cinnamon, we add sugar, we add a flaky crust, and now we have a supernormal stimuli of an apple. So an apple pie isn't going to occur in nature, and most of us would find that a much more compelling food than an apple. So, for example, if you're in bed tonight and you have apples in your kitchen, you're probably not going to think twice about it. But some people, if they had an apple pie in their kitchen, would think about that apple pie. Should I get out of bed to have some pie? Okay, that's a supernormal stimuli. And that's what sex tech is. So even porn that is been around now for decades, porn itself is an example of a supernormal stimuli in that it can offer a level of intensity and visual impact that many humans can't compete with. Okay, but now as sex tech becomes more and more advanced, we're seeing more and more powerful examples of sex tech being supernormal stimuli. So VR porn, chatbots and avatars that are willing to have any kind of conversation and engage in any kind of sex act where many humans would simply not be willing to do. So I can give you more and more examples of that, but you've got the idea that all sex tech, even sex toys like a traditional vibrator that a woman would use for stimulation can stimulate her body probably much more intensely than a human could. So these are all examples of supernormal stimuli, and that's why they are so compelling. And so as technology gets more and more advanced, this sex tech is going to become that much more compelling. Now, it's important, I think, for us to understand that this tech also is attractive differently to different people, basically different sexes, based on their instincts. So men and women have different sexual instincts. We're all the same in most ways with regards to sex, right? We all are the same in most ways with regards to everything. But in some very ancient sexual traits, some ancient sexual instincts, we are different. And from that perspective, much of sex tech, not all, but much of sex tech is more compelling to male sexual instincts than it is to female sexual instincts. Let me give you an example of how male sexual instincts and female instincts can be different. If you go to a strip club with a female stripping, and men, largely men in the audience, they're very serious in that strip club. They're getting needs met there. It's not a joke. There are a few bachelor parties that might be there, getting drunk, whatever. But most people in that strip club are there very seriously for a reason. They're getting needs met, instinctive needs. Now, if you go to a strip club where there's a male stripping and largely women in the audience, the women are having a great time. They're laughing, they're engaged and feeling empowered, and it's a fun experience for them. But those women aren't getting a need met. There's no instinctive need that's getting met for those women by watching a guy strip, where it's different in a strip club that features female stripping. Okay, that's the difference. That's an easy way to understand the difference between male and female instincts. And those same kinds of instincts get gratified differently with sex tech. So what that means is I can anticipate that as sex tech becomes more and more advanced, it's going to be more and more compelling in many ways to men than it is to women. And I do worry about how that's going to impact gender relationships over time. So what that means for you is that whenever you engage in sex tech, whoever you are and whatever kind of sex tech you use, remember that it is a supernormal stimuli and be mindful of your use, because just like with food, it can be more and more compelling for people. And my hope is that people use sex tech to enhance their intimate relationships, not substitute for them. Okay? So that's your science teaching for today.